Back in the late 1980s, during my high school years, I would often spend time after school goofing off with friends, graffiti, getting into mischief, and smoking a lot of cigarettes. Hell, I probably chain smoked more than ever in my life, and for whatever reason, thought I was so cool doing it. In fact, me and 3 of my close friends would always meet up in this tiny little secluded wooded area just a few miles north of our house, always after school. I was a late bloomer on getting my license, so it's not like we ever drove around. Just kind of walked, hid, and smoked cigarettes, talked crap about friends, school life, family, and other kids we did not like. Always having a cigarette. This would have been my senior year of high school. I remember, because all throughout my high school, I gradually began smoking more and more, until this point, which kind of killed it for me. So, in a way, I can kind of thank this experience for stopping my cigarette addiction, because I was too scared to return to this location, really the only place that I felt safe smoking cigarettes, to be honest. My family, being extremely Catholic, had they caught me, I probably would have been beat with a belt. Yes, still, even at 17 years of age. So, anyway, back to the story. We're back here in this little wooded secluded spot, tucked far away from anybody else's attention or knowledge of where we are. In fact, only me and a few of my friends even knew about this spot. It's kind of off a small little trail, but tucked in just enough to where you wouldn't even know it had you not gone the way I went. And since this was long before cell phones or smartphones, I wouldn't even use a payphone. I would often just tell my parents before school, hey, I'm gonna go hang out with my friends after school and be back a little after dinner. And they were always pretty cool with it. Luckily, now that I've kind of set up the story and the background, we're sitting there in our little area, smoking a cigarette, talking crap, when all of a sudden, I felt the forest get really quiet around me. I shouldn't say forest. It's not like we were in the middle of nowhere in a dense, green, lush forest, like you probably are thinking. It was kind of a wooded area, but it wasn't so much extremely dense like you would think. I don't know, maybe like a national forest. This was more like a wooded area that was kind of cleared, at least the part we had come from, and behind us was a little bit thicker. Lots of brush and briar, thorns and all that. It was May or June, just about ready for graduation, so all the foliage was back in full bloom, making it very thick and muggy. And due to this, visibility wasn't the greatest, but you could still generally see around you. Like if somebody was approaching us from the north, we could see, even though we were a little bit hidden behind the bushes and stuff. We were just in the middle of conversation when everything had gotten quiet. My friend was talking, and I remember shushing him and telling him to listen. We all kind of listened, and it was far too quiet. You could drop a pin on the ground and hear it. It was making me uncomfortable, and I remember asking why it had suddenly got so quiet. My friends and I were looking around. I felt like in unison, we were all expecting something to happen. What? We had no idea. Then, like a crescendoing noise, we heard something large on 2 feet begin to approach us from the north, right behind us. It was slow, but very steady. We all began to turn our attention towards that direction. It sounded like a huge giant, slowly approaching us. Not a casual walking speed, or even running. Almost kind of like a small pitter-pattering, if that's making any sense at all. But you can hear the thud, or feel it, and whatever was making it had great weight behind it. After maybe a couple more moments of hearing this pitter-pattering coming closer, we could see, out of the denseness and whatever light there was during that time of day, which was getting near dusk, this large black shape coming toward us. That was it for us. I was so terrified. We all threw our cigarettes down and ran out of there as quick as we could. What scares us even worse is this figure pursued us. It went even faster, the further down the trail we got, and it even sounded like it was gaining on us. But whatever it was intelligent enough to stay behind the majority of brush, so we couldn't really see it. It kept itself, or themselves, pretty well concealed, and the most we could ever see was a large black silhouette. I couldn't tell you if it had hair, or a head, or any really important details, just that it looked like a really large thing, or person, I guess. However, because it is about a 3 to 4 minute walk back to our little secluded spot to the sidewalk, this thing had plenty of time to gain on us, and at one point or another, felt like it could have reached out and grabbed one of us. Because my friends bolted off in front of me, I of course was the last one, the very one closest to whatever this thing was. And I'm telling you, I have never been more terrified in my life than I was in that afternoon. There were times that I swear it was right behind me, and I never looked back. I was living in a real-life monster movie, and too afraid to face whatever it was. We finally got down to the sidewalk, and just grabbed our bikes without even looking, nearly stumbling and falling over on them, and it felt like we all went about 30 miles an hour on our bikes with how terrified and full of adrenaline we were. Once we got a little ways away, we stopped, took a breather, and kept checking behind us. We were now in a nearby neighborhood, about 5 or 10 minutes away from the sidewalk that you would use to take that little spot into the forest. We were scared, asking what that was. After a minute or so, my friend tried to calm us all down, saying somebody was just messing with us. But I told him, nobody is that large. Did you hear the weight behind it? And why would they or it chase us? The direction it came from is undeveloped land. As far as I remember, there was nothing out there. I think just woods for miles and miles. No houses or nothing. All the developed land and houses were to the east, west, and south of us, primarily the south. So there'd be no reason for anybody to be back there. I mean, it's not like anybody hunts back there or anything. And this was in May or June. So again, no reason why anybody should be back there. And also, I can't help but think of why somebody so large would be making such a loud sound. If somebody was trying to sneak up on us, why would they be thudding so loud? Had to weigh an enormous weight, since as it got closer, we could feel the vibrations on the ground. Just like in a video game or a movie, the thud, 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 and feel the shaking of the ground as this large, massive thing or person approached. It was the most terrifying experience I've had yet, as I explained to you, and in the grand scheme of things, in a positive way, I somehow kind of connected cigarettes to that experience, and it caused me to stop smoking after that. As far as what chased us out of the woods that day, I'll never know. I was probably 7 or 8 at the time this happened, and even though it's not necessarily a monster story, it still is a pretty crazy story when you hear it. So, I used to go play down by this small little creek with a couple of friends. By the way, I lived in a small town in north-central Idaho, and we used to play by this creek just about every day in the summertime. Until one day, one of my friends brought his dog, whom he had for a while, and at some point or another, I can't remember when or how, but the dog started digging something up that resembled a bone. Being 7-8-year-olds, we thought it was the coolest thing in the world. We got sticks and began digging, only to come and find out that what the dog had found and what we had unearthed with our sticks was indeed part or a fragment of a human skull. We all screamed and freaked out, and I think my friend, I don't remember if he did it then, but somebody called the police, and it caused a full-blown investigation. I remember we were thoroughly questioned, asked how long it was there. You know, all the usual 20 questions that investigators ask. Anyway, as time went on, it turns out that a couple people were murdered a few years back, and both of their bodies were dumped in that same location where we used to play all the time as kids. I'm assuming that their bodies were buried right next to that creek, and we just so happened, or my friend's dog just so happened to dig up part of the skull of one of the missing individuals. From what I had heard through the grapevine, both remains were discovered right there next to that river. Still kind of gives me goosebumps even to this day to think about it. I don't live in Idaho anymore, but I've thought about returning and just visiting that creek just for fun. After that happened, of course, my parents wouldn't allow any of us back there. Not to mention, it had become a full-on investigation, so we weren't really allowed to tamper with any of that. But even after all that ended, and they got the remains and it was all closed off, we still weren't allowed to go back there. In 2007, I went on a minor hunting expedition with my father while he hunted up in northern Canada. It was cold, harsh, but also an amazing experience to be out and one with nature. This wasn't the very first time I had gone out with my father either. He had taken me along several trips, but I'd never been in Canada, and I had never been this far north, besides the actual hunting trip itself, which for the most part went amazing. There is one part that really disturbs me, and has never quite left my memory banks, because I think back to it often, realizing that we are not on top of the food chain, and in fact, far from it. We had discovered a large cave along a rocky outcropping against a mountainside. Upon going in, we noticed the thick smell of blood and death. That's when we saw there was a lot of blood coming out of the cave, as if something had bled and left the cavern. We thought this was strange, but it could have been from an animal fight, potentially, and the injured animal leaving the cave. And after exploring just a wee bit further, my father and I made the most gruesome and disturbing discovery of that entire trip. So much so that it still stands out in my mind, a fully grown grizzly bear with its entire head and neck completely ripped off. While we never found the head, the body was there, and with enough ample lighting, we saw the carnage that laid between us. In fact, there was so much blood that it was hard to even make sense of what had happened. It looked like there had been some sort of fight, although not much, since this grizzly bear clearly lost, and the head was missing. After looking, well, my father did most of the looking. I tried to keep myself from puking. The smell was pretty bad, and the body had been there at least a day or two, so it was stinking pretty bad. My father inspected the wounds, grossed out and curious, far more than I was, and told me that whatever had done this clearly had ripped the head off this bear, looking at the wounds and the way the flesh was torn. And of course there was so much blood, you couldn't make out exactly the tracks or anything, like what animal had come in here, or what exactly had happened. You could even hardly make out what kind of struggle there was. So his best guess was that this bear was in its den, and it did look like a bear den. Something came into the cavern and ripped this bear's head clear off its body. Then, whatever it did with the head, we don't know. But that would explain the massive blood trail leading out to the entrance of the cavern and disappearing once it got to the dirt. It stunk pretty bad in there. Also, looking around, we found small animal bones and just general signs you would of a general bear den. It wasn't large, but fit just enough for a bear. It's safe to say we were pretty smart about our findings, and left the cave and left that part of the area the rest of the day. And for the remainder of that trip, my dad and I would always discuss back and forth, what has the power to go in and kill a grizzly bear? Not only that, but rip its head clean off its body. Oh, and I don't want to forget to add that my dad thoroughly spent enough time looking at the body, while I kind of stood outside, trying to get some fresh air, really trying to inspect everything that went on. He said he pretty thoroughly observed its body, saw no scratches, tears, cuts, bangs, broken bones. It's as if whatever came in there just came in the cavern, barely even fought the bear, ripped its head off, and left. The bear was found lying on its side, or at least its body was, so it doesn't appear to be much of a fight or struggle. Something came in there and overpowered an adult male grizzly bear. Now you tell me, what on earth has that kind of power?